Hello, I'm Stuart Craner. Welcome to this session, which is part of 3 days of webinars venturing into the ecosystem future. I'm director of the Business Ecosystem Alliance and co-founder of Thinkers 50. And we are delighted once again to be partnering with the Higher Model Institute on this virtual event, exploring the very latest thinking and best practice in the field of business ecosystems. We're excited that people from more than 50 countries have signed up for these sessions. So welcome to you, wherever you are joining from Australia to Zambia. Please send in your comments, thoughts, questions, and queries at any time during the sessions. Now, our first session is deeply practical, proof of the truism that there is nothing so practical as a great idea. Our theme for this session is navigating the open ecosystem transition. Insights from the journey of Roche Diagnostics. To navigate a way through this journey and to extract the practical lessons and implications, we are joined by Corinne Dive-Reclus, who is Global Head of Digital Diagnostics at Roche, and Simone Cicero and Luca Ruggeri of Boundaryless, which is a formidable champion of the new world of organizations. So welcome to Corinne, Simone, and Luca. I will hand over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, it's great to be here. As people know, Boundaryless is a member of the Business Ecosystem Alliance, and we are proud to be part of this event. So let me just share a quick overview of the webinar. We're going to talk about navigating the challenges of building open ecosystems as a transition from more traditional ways of organizing just a mention of Boundaryless as member of Business Ecosystem Alliance. Boundaryless is, as you may know, creating frameworks for the ecosystem and platform age. So you can check them out on our website. These are open frameworks you can use. Today, it's me, CEO of Boundaryless, and Luca Ruggeri, our micro enterprise lead for platform design and all works related to platform design toolkit. Ciao, Luca. Great to have you here.
Hi, hello, everyone.
And we have Corinne Dive-Reclus. She's head of let me take the name well. Global Head of Digital Diagnostics at Roche. And Corinne and myself and Luca, we exchange a lot about these topics. So when we were requested by Stuart to point out great leaders that have faced this transition, we immediately thought about Corinne. So Corinne, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward for the discussion here and also to get some insights from the question of Stuart, but also the ones from the audience.
Thank you so much. And as you already anticipated, this is a program we have today. We're gonna, overall talk about these few points. First of all, we want to discuss, give a bird's eye view of how Roche is managing this continuous transition from a traditional approach to this ecosystem enablement model. Then we're gonna possibly dive into some of the key pieces of this transition. So we're going to talk about skills, culture, approaches, managing teams, units, and so on, and hopefully share some practical lessons. And then if time allows, and hopefully we will have also time for collecting some of the questions from the audience. So let me stop sharing and dive directly into the opening question, as I said. So maybe, Corinne, you can give us an overview, also from an historic perspective, how Roche kind of decided that it was time to switch into a new model, and how you and your teams and the organization itself put things in motion. And maybe you can also mention some of the highlights, I would say, in terms of core elements of this ongoing transition, which is another point that you strongly pointed out, that the transition is ongoing, it's far from being done and finished. So I'll leave it to you to give an overview, I would say.
So yeah, let's take it. So for instance, Roche is a very large organization, and in fact there is two main branches into it. There is Roche Pharma, that is usually the well-known one, and Roche Diagnostics. Fortunately, after the pandemic, people know more about Roche Diagnostics due to COVID testing. So at least it's a little bit easier to explain here. And in fact, when I started exploring this ecosystem journey, in fact, it started 4 years ago or 5 years ago now, and I was not then head of a digital business. I was head, in fact, of a digital partnering organization. And it came to me that if, as a Roche Diagnostic, we wanted to make maximum impact for the patient and at the same time reduce cost to the society as large, we needed to accelerate access to innovation. And then as a partnering organization, looking with my business partner at the time, I said, well, the era of total solution provider is, especially in the digital space, is probably no longer here. Its service purpose, it was very simple for the customer, but in this case, it relies on one supplier to be able to provide it all. And we felt a very strong duty to bring innovation as fast as possible to the market, but at the same time, not being able to absorb all the investment or create all the solutions. It was even not desirable if we had access to investment to be able to do that, because then we will have a very monolithic view and set view about how to address the market. So this is how it came up with. And by looking at innovation, I was often asked as head of partnering then for the digital portfolio, so do we need to buy all those companies? Do we need to have distributor agreement with all those companies? And I say, wait a minute here. There is a limit about what our sales force can do, and they might not be best equipped to promote this innovation. And then we had a big question in the room that say, what do we do then? And then is where we were looking at alternative model to bring this innovation, and without necessarily being the bottleneck in the middle of it, either from a portfolio development point of view or even from a sales force capability viewpoint. And then we got interested with open ecosystem. It was not a new concept. Already some markets were going that way. And then the second learning was, okay, let's create a platform, open API, and off we go. And then I have also a strong engineering background. I say, wait, let on a minute. Maybe we need to put some intellectual thought about it before betting that way. So in fact, we were looking for a methodology that will help us at all levels, technical, partnering, strategy, and business, to align our thought about how to look at it the right way. And then we started using some of the methodology being provided by Boundaryless. And the first step of a journey is also to admit that even if we're in a very large international company, let's not assume that we need to orchestrate the ecosystem. It might not be the best position for us. So it was the mutual understanding. Let's understand who are already the players, not in terms of competitive analysis, but more as a mutual benefit interplay. And then it was a very different way to look at the companies around us and to see what were their position, what limited them, what limited us, and to see at some point if we have touch point where if we were to go on the market together in a very loose way, in this case, it will benefit everybody and bring this innovation closer to our customer. So in fact, I would not underestimate the intellectual thought and the rigor of the intellectual process that to really sure about what you're doing. But once that is clear, the excellent things we have learned with towards our executive board of our board of director is in fact when we explain to them how we wanted to shift part of a business. So it's not a one for all. We will probably both business model, the existing one and the open ecosystem, will cohabit forever. So it's not necessarily a replacement. And It's a cohabitation, more both of them, that in fact, when we explain the reason why, we don't have to bring the decision maker to the methodology, because the arguments are so clear that in fact, we can express how it goes. And in fact, we were surprised by the high level of enthusiasm from executive board and the board of director, because in fact, we were feeling more incomprehension of resistance from the middle layer of the organization than from the top. And after that, what is very critical is to create proof point on the market. So it's not a big bet. We really find on which part of the portfolio we wanted really to test the market. We are still testing the market into it, getting traction, sometimes having issues we didn't anticipate. And so this is really where we are today. So part of our portfolio, we have a free part of our portfolio that in fact are now designed around open ecosystem. And we're developing that not only with ourselves, but also with our partner around. That also requires not just a change of mindset within the organization, it also requires change of mindset of our own customers. And sometimes they're even conflicted a little bit themselves. So they don't want to be locked in by a provider, but they don't want to multiply the number of partners they want to work with. And this is where we're trying to balance it into the market today to see what's the right balancing act between to be the sole supplier being responsible for everything, but also to let them bring their own innovation. The surprise too from our own customer in the healthcare system is it's not only innovation from other companies they're interested. Sometimes they also have in-house innovation that they cannot activate because they do not have the whole infrastructure or manpower to do that. But they're also looking at what we're bringing on the market as an open ecosystem play as a way to make better use of their internal innovation as part of this collective exercise between commercial player and internal development.
Can I ask you maybe to kind of highlight the major lessons learned in this process, maybe to help you figure out, just a few key aspects. Maybe we can look into these through three lenses. One is the product lens. So what is your lessons learned from the perspective of designing a product or architecting a product architecture and structure? Then organization. So what did you change in terms of how teams work, or maybe how do you account a business performance in terms of, I don't know, P&L or OKRs and things like that? So again, product, org, and finally, from a perspective of skills and culture. So more the people side, right? I don't know, maybe you mentioned already you use some of our methodologies, open source methodologies, but I'm thinking of, I don't know, maybe you made a community of practice or internal podcasts or knowledge sharing or something like that. So three things, product structure, org structure, and skills and culture.
So from the product structure, it's very clear that when people want to participate to an ecosystem or wants to build one and to be the orchestrator, and once again, both options are valid. And in fact, we're using both options based on what is our place in the ecosystem of companies around us, is to stop thinking in terms of product. That is not helpful, because in ecosystem, what you're talking more is about a value proposition. And within this value proposition, so what is the end-to-end problems that needs to be cracked? And in a healthcare, it could be operational excellence. It could be medical insight. It could be even interoperability. So, and then you understand, you develop your portfolio and you find partners or you join partners who have part of a puzzle. So trying to build your portfolio one product at a time up, it's not working. It's significantly reworking about where are the end-to-end issues that need to be resolved, who can help, how it's being organized for all the different parties to be contributed. And in fact, the marketing on the market needs to be based on that. And only when that is being understood by the customer, the place of one product or the product of the partners can be explained. So not only is quite significant in a way we rethink our portfolio, but it's also significant into the marketing and sales process. Otherwise, the customers are lost and they do not understand the value of the sums of a part. So that that was the critical shift that we had to do. The second one in terms of organization, I would say the organization are not significantly changed. So we still have a product manager, although they become more value proposition manager. We still have sales, we still have marketing. The partnering organization has changed quite a lot because doing transactional relationship, one contract at the time, is not what you do in an ecosystem play, because here what you're trying to do is to build a bigger story together. So the type of contract is more about co-marketing, co-management, co-revenue sharing, that it requires also very transparency about the rules, because you cannot have one rule per partner into the ecosystem. You need to have transparent rules that are 90% the same for all the players. So I think that was, from an organization viewpoint, the partnering organization has to reorganize themselves and to make the difference between licensing contract and an open ecosystem contract. So for the finance viewpoint also, for their organization, they have to rethink about the back office process, especially if some level of revenue sharing is taken into account. Then the back office process and the invoicing and the contracting is not the same. Now, from a skill and culture is where, in fact, we have the biggest shift, and especially for the product team. So to elevate them, don't think about product, think about the role of the ecosystem and how do we contribute into it, and how we can make sure it's going to work. So that was a big culture shift. From a sales perspective, the trickiest things to be, and we're still trying to catch some of our affiliates onto this one, is to deeply understand the difference between a distributor contract and an open ecosystem environment. Because for me, it's very clear. Ecosystem, each party sells on their own. We might have some level of co-marketing. Yes, we have the same stories, but in fact, everybody sells on their own term. While when in a distributor, you have one in the lead, conveying all the messages for everybody else, and to some extent controlling the relationship with the customer. So helping them to shift between the two. There is some element of scare. Do you ask me to share my customer? The second element is, should we really let them sell on their own? What is my role? And so the role of co-marketing or going together, in fact, is there is a lot of learning on the go. And to answer some of your question, in order to scale up the 65 affiliates we have around the world for this type of business model, we have created, in fact, community of practice. And to make those community of practice works, in fact, we have global business manager managing ecosystem. We have the lead sales, affiliate sales, managing also and promoting the ecosystem, because the promotion on the marketplace at the local level is very different. But we also have representation for the back office to make sure that we remove manual tasks out of this co-promotion, contract negotiation, and revenue recognition. Because usually what happens is when we move from a distributor model to where Roche distribute party from third parties to an ecosystem model, is suddenly we're moving from tens of partners to potentially hundreds of partners. Today, we're not at the hundreds level, but we are on the 20 to 30, and that is going up. And then in this case, it needs to be managed a different way. Maybe the only new rule we have to create was also this concept of technical ecosystem manager, because in some of the instances, we are not playing in an existing ecosystem, but we're orchestrating it. with a platform element, then we need to make sure that when we enhance the platform or when we evolve the APIs, we can also communicate with all the different parties in the ecosystem to ensure that everything is still working. If they want, we also have to listen to them about what they need from the platform to further enhance the total value of the ecosystem. And this type of user community, the partner being the user then, is very critical to make sure that all the effort that have been put within this type of business model is not slowly dying 5 years down the line.
I mean, I know that Luca has a question coming up, but I want to maybe underline a couple of things for our listeners, which I think are essential. I think in what you said, what we get is this raising important towards an holistic point of view. So when I say holistic point of view, for example, I refer to when you said we have learned how to look into these end-to-end problems, right? And this reminded me, for example, an interview we had on our podcast with Scott Brinker, who is the chief of ecosystem at HubSpot, when he mentioned this idea of a joint customer needs. So looking at your products as part of flows or interactions that go beyond the single product and really, you know, attached to broader elements. And I also recall some of the work we've done together, but in general, I think this idea of mapping that becomes so important when you embrace an ecosystemic approach. So suddenly you move from analyzing the single customer problem into trying to get a glimpse of the whole set of interactions happen in an ecosystem. So I think from my perspective and experience, this is one of the major shifts in culture that the companies need to entertain as they switch. So having this capability to look at the whole system dynamics, I think this is essential. So unless you have something to add on this, I would leave it to Luca for the...
I would say the complement to what you say is also, without being naive, but also not to look at all the other companies as potential competitors, but more also to see where, in fact, together we can do more than independently of each other. So obviously, you know, competitive analysis still needs to be done, but also ecosystem is a place where sometimes is the right thing to do for this specific ecosystem play, in fact, even to collaborate with your direct competitors. And that is some of the hard discussion we had within Roche Diagnostics that might have made some of my colleagues very uncomfortable. But it's the reality of the world we're in is really end-to-end use cases driven, and if it's being done not in a naive way, in fact, is very powerful, especially for the customer, because we can crack hard problem for them.
Thank you so much, Luca.
Yeah, thanks, Corinne, because you prepared the perfect ground for my question. So I didn't know exactly how to introduce it, but you did the magic. So my question is, I believe that ecosystem relationships are so important also, not only between a company and potential competitor, but also between companies and clients and customers, especially maybe in those fields like yours in healthcare that are strongly regulated, and most of tenders are, a lot of tenders are public tenders, no? Yeah. And sometimes it can happen that the innovation drivers or triggers that are maybe stimulating you to think about new solutions, new products, or new extensions to existing products. Being a giant company, you can be faster at detecting these opportunities coming from your clients, but then your clients couldn't be ready then to purchase or to adopt or to use the solution that you're offering. So I think that there should be a kind of cultural exchange or methodological exchange.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point. I would say working in the healthcare industry, in fact, there is a different dynamic between the private sector and the public sector. So on the private sector, in fact, the concept of ecosystem and the openness of it and the fact that things will evolve over time, in fact, is instinctively really well understood by the decision makers and the C-suite of those institutions. In a public sector, it needs to be driven by tenders for all the good reasons, because we're talking about public money. So it makes total sense. But in this case, sometimes some of those tenders, they have a 7 years horizon. And in fact, the way it's being tendered, it needs to be a close offering that is committed ahead of time for 7 years. And that, to some extent, it's difficult, because if you want to encourage innovation, you cannot declare 7 years in advance the innovation that you might have available during this 7 years period. So that creates some tension. The other tension is usually they want a main contractor taking responsibility for the full tender, that in this case create tension with our ecosystem play, where we let our partners, in fact, negotiate on their own commercial terms, in fact, how they want to position and sell their solution. And most of the time, the reason why we do that also is because they're usually best placed to pitch for their solution than we are, because it's their domain of expertise. This is what they bring to the table. So it's still learning in progress. What we have learned so far is we're trying as much as possible to co-tender. And now where we've been in a phase for the last 6 months, but due to the structure of a public tendering, to do it incrementally, to start shaping it and saying that if the healthcare system that are the public healthcare system, they want to take innovation as it comes, the 7-year standards cannot be a closed list of products. It needs to be open. And so we're in the intensive shaping phase. For the moment, the way we're addressing it is to go for co-tendering as much as possible, or when that it's possible, to remove our open ecosystem solution out of public tendering for the time being, and to shape the market to have a specific tender shape in a different way for the ecosystem play. So there is this tension. I can understand that when it's about public money, people want to know exactly what is being paid for. But with the pace of innovation, a 7 years period is a very long period of time. And the tenders are still very much product oriented. Mm-hmm. They are not they're not, in fact, they're not being expressed in a way about what problems are you going to solve with me. So they're not really, solution driven. And even the level of service level agreement is not really here. So it's quite difficult, but that really requires effort for everybody, not just for us, but for the other companies also pushing within this direction. And the best we can do in this transition phase is also to create success on the private sector in order to show evidence that in different setup, in fact, it's a valuable business model, both for all the parties.
Yeah, this is very smart, I think. So using these dynamic partnerships also to communicate complex value proposition is very important. Okay. I think that, I don't know if Simone or Stuart.
No, I know Stuart is coming up with some questions. And again, I maybe just a quick highlight before I leave it to Stuart, I leave the floor to Stuart. It's, your mention of standards. I think that's another very important consideration, that especially incumbents, as they move into platforms and ecosystem, they need to keep in mind, and especially within industries that have such a slow innovation process, like healthcare, for example, where when you deal with hospitals, for example, they normally change their technology very rarely and slowly, and it's really sometimes frustrating to say, I want to bring a new standard, for example, or a new way of connecting machines to create more possibilities and so on, and then you deal with these incumbent infrastructures, right, that are really hard to change. So I think maybe people that work in industries that are a bit less constrained by this inertia, they should be more aggressive with their platform strategies, because they don't know how lucky they are that there is not this slow inertia in infrastructure that makes everything more difficult, I think. So that's another consideration that I wanted to make. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. People are sending in their questions. Please send in any more questions, any thoughts or queries or observations along the way. Corinne, there's a question about the response of your legal teams, because obviously you're in a very regulated industry, and there's lots of legality surrounding your activities. And you've kind of alluded to it in what you've said, in talking about kind of a more dynamic relationships and more dynamic contracting, perhaps. But are legal teams equipped to understand these new scenarios? That's one question that's come in. And was there a need to establish an entirely new legal framework, given what you're doing?
Yeah, so especially we have established it was in fact a co-development of legal and partnering to define new contract type. And the new contract type also not only is about co-marketing and revenue sharing agreement, but also there is if you look at all the level of nervousness about data privacy and cybersecurity, there is also, especially when there is a platform being involved here, in fact, we really have to create standard templates explaining about what is the role of each party, regarding GDPR, who is a data processor, who is a data holder, all these technicalities. In cybersecurity, what are the role of a responsibility between the platform provider and the application provider on the ecosystem? And all that has taken the form into a standard framework agreement and contract. And every time we are approached by a potential partner or we are approaching one, in fact, it's very important this standardization of contract is in place. Otherwise, in fact, the liability question in this case is going to be very high. So that is for the pure legal term, and the legal and regulatory, I will put it. The second aspect to it is the fairness of the ecosystem. You cannot have ad hoc contract, one partner at the time, otherwise the dynamic of the ecosystem is not going to work. So because we are focusing on end-to-end problem, there needs to be a common vision, and the common vision needs to be supported by standard way of playing within this one. So no one feels shortchanged. It's also a better way to scale partnership at a higher pace, lower cost for both parties in the organization, and in a more robust way, because those contracts have been thoroughly thought through and tested with a few partners. Now in the healthcare environment, we also have the aspect of what is a medical product or not. That is another aspect of a regulation we have. And here, in fact, it's very also important that the platform play, in fact, stay away of medical regulation as much as possible. And in fact, only applications on the specific applications based on their medical claim are medically regulated. So there is an overall architecture thinking to make sure we minimize the number of parties having a medically regulated application on the system. By design, we try to keep the platform away from it. And even from our own application, we are always making conscious choices about keeping to the minimum where the medical part is, the medical knowledge is being created by the software and isolated to the rest of the part, to make sure that the whole ecosystem is not being considered medically regulated as a whole, either by the FDA, for instance, or the European authorities. So there is also a technical architecture that meets regulatory to isolate the ones that are subjected to very specific regulatory principles behind cybersecurity and data privacy that tend to be cross-industry, in order not to drag the whole ecosystem within the burden of the anti-regulation for us of medical regulation. Does that answer your question, Stuart?
Yeah. Thanks, Corinne. You talked earlier about you've got 20 or 30 partners, and the numbers could grow to hundreds in the future. And it seems, do we have the knowledge? We're not talking about Roche Diagnostics solely, but do we have the knowledge and skills to manage those sorts of ecosystems? Because with the kind of growing ecosystem, there's a degree of complexity and ambiguity, which is really difficult to manage.
Exactly. So in fact, is where we are, we're constantly learning, because we are fully aware of what you said. There is also, we are fully aware of a flying eel effect. At the beginning is a little bit slow because there is only a maximum number of partners to find until you have a significant footprint on the market. And as soon as but you can't have a large footprint on the market if you have no partner. But after a while, there is an exponential growth. So what we have been doing in the last 2 years, we're launching those products, and where we're monitoring and evolving on a very regular basis through the community of practice, is to make sure that we're removing manual work out of the management of the partners. So practical examples, we are a global business. We have some partners working only in Spain and Italy today. As soon as they decide to enter the German market, they should not pick their phone and to call someone in my team to say, no, I can operate in Germany. We need to have a partner portal where they self-declare themselves that now they're open for business in Germany. And immediately on our Roche marketplace, then this third-party product becomes visible to our customer. So same thing, the way it's so important also to standardize contractual term is to be able to automate that, like revenue recognition needs to be automated. So that means on the ERP system between both companies, we need to provide systems where that is being done automatically. And so that is really the back office and the running of a business that we try to automate as much as possible. Where we will have to see is how much, what does it mean to manage a user community of 20 partners, 30 partners versus 200. I think here we are still in a learning mode, and we don't want to do too much too soon, because then we don't have a proof point, but we are still in a learning curve to see whether or not the way we are being set up today with a few user community, whether or not is the right way to do that if we have changed the order of magnitude, let's say moving from 30 to 300, maybe we need a different system, but we don't know that yet. And we also don't want to overinvest too soon until we really have cracked what we're doing on the market right now.
Okay. Corinne talked about changing the mindset of customers, and you also said customers sometimes get lost in the kind of the new way of working. I mean, Simone, is that something you've come across a lot in your work? That changing the mindset of the customers is a big challenge and is a difficult thing to achieve.
Well, I mean, I think it really depends on the customer. So when Corinne mentioned the customer, I think we have to understand what type of customers she's talking about. So most likely, Corinne, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about healthcare institutions, right? For example. Yeah. So of course, their behavior is much different from I don't know, a consumer behavior, for example, or a small businesses for sure. So typically, I would say that in industries like the ones that Corinne is facing and Roche is facing, we're talking about customers that need to be educated, you know, and need to be very much brought into this new perspective of composing their own experiences with products by combining, for example, plugins or extensions to one of the products that Roche is bringing to them. So there is an element of the customer becoming more active in the development of the product, in the customization of the product, while in more, I would say, more dynamic context where, I don't know, for example, you rely with small businesses to remain in the business-to-business realm. I must say that most of the customers we talk to have the other, you know, have a inverse problem, that the customers are more advanced than them, and they actually educate the business and tell them, for example, you know, I'm using this or this other product, and so your product needs to be nicely connected with them, and so you kind of have the other perspective, I would say. I don't know, maybe Corinne, you can add a bit on the institutional customers.
Yeah, I think it's right. So mainly it's healthcare institution or diagnostic laboratories. And the one where we see the highest level of appetite, also because they have their own internal development, will be the global laboratory chains around the world, because they also see the limit of doing those digital solutions on their own. And so they understand by nature that they already have a Zoom application. And so they're more in the category of what we say they're looking for solutions. And when one of their trusted suppliers is going to them, talking the same talk as what they're thinking, in this case, it clicks very quickly.
Yeah, Luca, from your point of view, I mean, you've worked with lots of organizations with Boundaryless. What are the key lessons from Roche Diagnostics and what Corinne's been talking about for you?
Well, a lot of insights and a lot of lessons learned, but I will highlight once more the importance of addressing these complex product strategy and platform product strategy at portfolio level. Because of course, I mean, this is some of the key principles that we are adopting in our methodologies, but also every time we try to check the, let's say, the reality with customers. And so also in this case, focusing at portfolio level allow us and Roche, of course, to maybe do something that goes towards a better value perception, better value proposition creation for what was already existing. So my point is, given that it's normally harder and takes longer also to have the market adopting a new product, because then you need to think about market traction, marketing, and so on. And the example that also Corinne mentioned was that since they already have a good market traction for some existing products, thanks to the portfolio innovation, they were able of thinking about added value service. Maybe I could find a better name for that, but you got the point. And so that they can use the existing services, the existing products as a, let's say, as a vehicle, as a hoax to send these new values, these new updates, these new elements to existing customers, and also stimulating the attraction of new customers. So I think that this is pretty important.
Yeah, I think we are going adjacent to the core of our core, still being connected to our core. And then, in fact, we have also some level of, we have high level of credibility from our customer on our core offering, what we are known for. And now also, when we engage on those discussions with our customers, we're already from a place of trust, because we're already in, and we've been working with them for years and years and years. And across the pandemic also, that was tight and required a lot of in fact, commitment from everybody in the healthcare industry to go through that. I think the level of trust is here. So it's not so much going in an account we've never been in, but also having those discussions to say, how do we co-joint shape and enable you to have access to innovation without having to make a huge investment on some platform element. But it's from a base of mutual knowledge, mutual understanding. We've been working with each other, we trust each other, so we can have those conversations. I imagine that will be very difficult for someone trying to penetrate the healthcare industry cold with this level of ecosystem play without having established some level of trust with some element of core business or core activity related to healthcare.
It's interesting you say adjacent to the core, and earlier, Corinne, you talked about the cohabitation of ecosystems with the existing system. But
exactly.
But so there's kind of an ongoing, there's always going to be a tension, isn't there?
Yeah, there will be always a tension, and I think the tension is desirable, because not every product line, in fact, may have a place into an open ecosystem. So in fact, it's not a religious war to say now it's ecosystem everywhere. It needs to be the result of a thoughtful process that serves the purpose. So if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. It's the same thing with AI. Well, when just a score mathematical formula is good enough to do the job, there is nothing wrong with that. So I think there is also this intellectual process at the beginning where we need to be very clear about why we need one and why we don't, and where we don't need one. And I think having clarity of that is very critical. Otherwise, you can go into a war of belief within a company. And
do you think, Corinne, being an engineer, having an engineering background is an advantage when you start thinking of ecosystems? Because it strikes me that it probably is.
Yeah, I think it is. So I think for me, it was, and maybe Cicero, Simone, you can report some of our earlier discussion. First, we understood that we needed a system to process our thought. And then, an ecosystem is like any engineering system. So you have components, you have role and responsibility, you have workflows, you have data flow, you have, so it can be a structure mind or a system mind or an engineering mind usually help a lot, because then You just bring back this just a system as any other system, and then you analyze the tension, where it works, where you have mutual interest, where the blocking factor could be, what you can unlock. So yes, my engineering background was also, at least it was my way of make sense of it. I'm not saying that if you don't have an engineering background, you can't analyze it, but having these skills, I could, it helped me tremendously to make sense of that, and also to be able to explain it to the executive board and the non-exec board of Roche, in fact, with no technical term into it. You don't have to expose everybody to the thought process. In fact, the endpoint should explain it, should make sense on its own. If people are curious, then you can go to the detail, but you don't have to give a burden of the intellectual process to everybody around you in the organization to promote ecosystem, because that will be a killer.
Simone, we're nearly out of time. Some final thoughts and conclusions from you.
Yes. No, but I mean, I don't want to take much time because we're already late. So let's just maybe draw a few big points that we can bring home from this conversation. Again, Corinne spoke about the need to switch into this systems view, to try to think holistically, map out. That's another thing that emerged quite a lot. And also from our work with Boundaryless, I can say that mapping portfolios, mapping interactions, mapping systems and industries is a big part of the work that we do with customers. So I totally echo this point. The importance to think about portfolios and adjacencies, as Corinne said, that's another important point. And then I want to end with her highlight of the role of trust, both inside the organization and outside of it, also talking to customers, building this idea of long-term plans, long-term relationships, non-extractive mindset. So I think that's another big highlight for me. So just a couple of bits for our listeners. If you want to, I mean, these are the points that we touched today. If you want to have more information, you can, first of all, you can go to this link, blss.io/OT23, all caps, that's it. You understood me. So sorry about that. And you can download the deck, and moreover, you can look into our blog where we have several posts that touch the topics that we discussed with Corinne today, and of course download our tools. If you want to reach out, here is my contact. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time, and thanks, Stuart, for inviting us, and Corinne for accepting our invitation to share your first-hand hardly gain lessons. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.